Hello and welcome to Self Power Now, where empowering women share their stories and advice about life, work, happiness, love, and success. I'm your host, Debbie Giussoni, and I'm so glad you're here with us today. So sit back and enjoy the show. Today, we're talking to Cathy Dimarchos. Cathy is a multi-talented woman with a big heart. She's an expert in conscious leadership and business advising. She helps people be comfortable with being uncomfortable by unlearning patterns that don't serve you so you can move forward and reach your goals. Don't we all want to do that? She's also a devout humanitarian working in Africa to help create economic security for women. Welcome, Cathy.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate you and your time and what you're doing.
Well, you too. And it's early in the morning down under there as we're taping this interview, right?
It is. It is.
Yes, yes. Well, first of all, for most entrepreneurs that I know and I end up working with, don't end up doing humanitarian work in Africa. What brought you to Africa in the first place?
Oh gosh. It was a 16-year-old daughter of mine who, when
Oh.
Ebola broke out, sat at the dining table and said, I'm going to go and do some work in Africa next year when I finish school before I start university. And you can imagine, the look around the table. My husband looks at her and says, no, Ebola's just broken out.
What year was this?
It was in 2014.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so she was finishing her schooling before she started university the following year. And so she was planning, we're very big about planning ahead. What do you want to do, And my son sat at the table and went, oh, I'm going to watch you negotiate this one. So that's where the journey really started. And in looking at, I guess, a 16-year-old who has that sort of vision, for me, it is, if they dare to dream it, then who am I not to actually support that? Of course, taking into consideration, the fears, I guess, that my husband, initially had.
And what was she wanting to go over there for?
To volunteer to work in orphanages.
Orphanages, okay.
Yeah. And as a family, we have always done philanthropical work. The kids have always actually been part of either going abroad and helping either teach English or build schools or do some sort of a community project. And so this wasn't uncommon. It was just Africa was somewhere we'd never even talked about. So that's where it started. So the journey began with her leaving. And she spent a month in Tanzania. And I then joined her. And I really actually joined her because I was trying to mitigate risk, or what I thought would be mitigating risk. Because she wanted to also live with a Maasai, spend part of that time working and living with a Maasai. And that's a really unknown territory, for us as a family. So a month later, I meet her at the airport. The airport is shutting down because there's nobody else, no more flights. And they're saying you're going to have to wait outside. And I'm thinking, oh my God.
Sounds like COVID. Yeah. We forget. Oh, Ebola was before COVID.
Yes, that's right. And anyway, so when she arrived, she could speak Swahili. She had already immersed herself living with this family.
In a month, she learned it?
It was incredible.
That's amazing.
Do you know, as she approached me, I could see that she was a different person. And as strange as that sounds, everything about her was different. So that's where the journey began. So we then actually spent the next week, because it was leading into Christmas, we went into Uganda and spent time trekking with the gorillas and with the chimps, and spent time looking at orphanages there. before we went back to Tanzania and started to then work with and live with a Maasai. So
And how long were you there during that trip?
I was there for 2 months. We stayed with a Maasai for 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the middle of Ngorongoro, the crater, in a place called Engelin. And let me tell you, there's really not a lot of tourists that are seen there. So there was.
What were you doing with your life before you went that you could just leave and go there? Were you doing your business work and
Um,
entrepreneurship?
I was actually running a business, a multi-million-dollar business in finance.
Oh my gosh. Did you do that from it didn't sound like you had a lot of internet access where you were
Do you
at.
know,
What happened?
it was the first time that I had really actually taken a break. I had set up that particular business some 2 decades before.
Hmm.
And so I'd reached the stage where the staff really could self-manage, but there were a few things that, only I could do. And so there were instances where I'd have to actually get a private car to take me to a hotel to try and actually get some work done with some lawyers, but internet was not really, the ideal, and certainly not possible with a Maasai. That was just near impossible.
So
There's little electricity there. There's no running water. It's quite
yes.
remote.
So I mean that must have had a great impact on you living with the Maasai. Can you talk a little bit about that culture and what kind of impact it did have you on a white woman from Australia, basically, and were you accepted?
Well, it was interesting because I think we had more engagement with males, which is, I guess, maybe okay and maybe not, because they're the ones that have multiple wives, so
Oh,
really unusual,
do you think they were looking for
circumstances.
another one?
Oh, I can tell you stories with my daughter. Let me tell you, panic stricken. But we began to understand our guide, who could speak English, basically, would pick us up in the morning and then actually take us through the territory, because we would have to walk to where we were going, whether it was with the orphanage or whether it was teaching English at the school, we would have to walk.
Mhm.
And it's red dirt everywhere. But it was the place where I honestly say, Debbie, it changed my life. It really enabled me to become awakened. And
Mm.
that was a journey. It took me a really long time to even understand what was happening for me, because I was there for my daughter. This wasn't about me, but
But it was.
it was. It was incredible.
You're
You know,
always in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, even though you may not think it at the time.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a firm believer of that. So, one of the stories that I share is that I remember sitting with one of the warriors, and he had actually been afforded the opportunity to go to university. And he said to me, Cathy, I am starting the Duputu Foundation. And I said to him, what is that, Kimani? And he said, I'm starting an organization where we can actually show our girls that they don't have to get married at the age of 11 and 13. Circumcision, they can say no to it,
Mm.
and they can continue to go to school. What do you think? And my instinct in that moment was, oh my God, absolutely. And I could go off on a tangent, but I sat there and I paused and I thought, exactly what you just shared, Debbie. I am a middle-aged white woman
Mm.
with privileges.
Mm.
And I just want to share that, with privileges. And
Yes.
I'm going to be leaving in a few weeks. What could I possibly know? What could I possibly share?
And
Genuinely.
that culture of, girls getting married that young, and I guess in that culture, multiple wives, has been ingrained for so many years. And he was trying to change that And how accepted was that? Or was it even, they have their own laws, right? Was that even legal?
Yeah. It's interesting because they almost live in a dichotomy.
Mm,
The West has actually influenced them to some extent. So it was fascinating that
hmm.
in a shack you could find Coca-Cola, but they don't have running water.
Oh,
They
gosh.
don't have refrigeration, by the way. It's just in a shack on a shelf.
You think
Um,
Coca-Cola could find ways to help them get water since they were selling their beverages there, but that's a whole nother story.
Oh yes, the mind boggled, when I saw that. But
Oh.
anyway, yes. Um, so for him, he was just starting to actually put that concept together. He had started the foundation, but it is exactly what you were just
Mm,
sharing, Debbie. They have been living like that for thousands of years. From a cultural
mm,
perspective, most of the Maasai still continue to practice, their beliefs. And so I honestly, in that moment, as I sat back, I thought exactly what I shared with you. But I then said, Kimani, I don't even know how to answer that. I know, for that young girl who is aspiring to be so much more than what she's seen, that would be exactly what she would want to hear from her,
mm,
from her community. But how does she then actually change or bridge that relationship that she has with her mother and then with her grandmother?
mm.
What needs to happen there? Because it's not just about saying, hey, let's do it. There has to be conversation. There has to be support, because
Acceptance, yes.
acceptance,
Yes.
absolutely. And so, he sat back and said, yes, Cathy, I understand. And that's why I need to help. And so even as a male, having that sort of a voice brings a different element, to the conversation.
Well, what's interesting to me is that it was a male who even initiated that, right?
Mm, yeah.
Which is so commendable, and he must have really been a high vibration being to understand the importance of that.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm thinking he was probably about 24 at the
Mm,
time, so still quite young,
yes.
but having that sort of insight and that commitment to bringing, that sort of a change to his community and his culture was phenomenal.
So
Um,
what happened from then?
so it was continual discussion. He couldn't understand how I wasn't jumping for joy, and so
You
there
were
was
doing
some.
the business thing, thinking through all the pieces, like how could this possibly make how can I make this happen?
Yeah. And look, I'm also a qualified counselor, so for me, it is always thinking about people and always leaving people in a better place. Our
Yes.
solutions for the West don't always work, in developing countries.
Right.
So we have to actually include everybody at that table to have that conversation, you know,
Mm,
feeling like you belong happens at every stage.
right.
And
Right.
so it was that continual discussion whilst I actually was there, and including some extended Maasai, including males, including his peers that were opposing it, and so it was good for him to actually see that it wasn't just a matter of let's make it happen. It was a matter of let's have a discussion and actually enable people to feel like they are contributing to the discussions before we even implement anything. Um, and so that is a continual journey for him. There are, I can tell you, young girls who, are talking about being pilots, who are talking about being scientists. And so that is the continual discussion, the fact that they're continuing their education and seeing themselves as part of that future leadership is phenomenal.
Mm,
Even the multiple wives, comes into play. So he was quite actually practical in his thinking, because he said, Cathy, we are breeding at rates that is not going to sustain our lands. We've
Mm.
got to stop this multiple wives. He said, I understand that it's our culture, but we can't continue, the way that we're going. But, it's embedded in
Mm.
their culture. It's embedded everywhere. This is one person looking to make a change, right? So that ripple effect has got to be slow. Everybody is going to learn and pick up at different stages, and some may not.
So
So,
my guess is you didn't just leave there and go back to work.
well, interesting.
Go back to your day job.
I did. I went back, and honestly, Debbie, it was 4 months later that I sat at the dining table and almost had this epiphany of, I hate my life. And I sat at the
Uh-huh.
dining table and shared those exact words, to
Mm.
my husband and my kids, who have been listening to, things that I've been saying,
And your
about,
daughter had come back with you at that time?
yeah, she had come back,
Yeah.
and we were planning the next trip. And so, our life then began this journey of, we will continue to go back. We will continue to pay it forward. We
Mhm.
will continue to leave an imprint that actually embeds their culture. But in that moment, I sat there and I honestly said, I genuinely hate my life. Look
Mm.
at all of this. We live in such a materialistic world, and yet we
Yeah.
continue to chase for what, right?
Right.
And my very bright, sparked young son, who at that stage, was at uni, in maybe about 20, said to me, Mum, you can't blame us for being born where we have been born, but you can do something about it.
Mhm.
And
You
it
can
was,
serve, you can serve others.
oh my gosh, of
Yeah.
course I can, and so it began the journey of, I can actually learn to utilize all of the wealth, both, in my mind,
Mhm.
in my actual living, in my income, to pay it forward. And so think about how that would look. So it started with working in orphanages and continuing to go back and taking people. But
Mhm.
then for me, it was, hang on a minute, there's more. It isn't just about going and working in orphanages. What else could I do? So I actually used all of my skills and knowledge and actually put the practices and the courses that I developed for the Leadership Institute of Australia for adults and executives,
Mhm.
transformed them into programs for young kids.
Wow.
And so I now run leadership programs from the ages of 11 and 12, which is the introduction level. And then in Form 4 or year 10, which is the 15 to 16-year-old. And then as they finish school and heading out into the workforce. So either as an entrepreneur or as a leader. And so those programs actually I also mentored
Mhm.
and have got facilitators on the ground. So we had embedded culture into those to make sure that that's not left to the West to look at, and to deliver. It
It's
is
just
actually,
an amazing story to me about how, like, we never know how our life is going to get from point A to point B. And we never think, like, is this going to be important in another realm? And look what happened. I mean, had you not had that
yeah.
company and weren't doing that kind of work already, you might not have even gone to Africa. You might not have even been doing this program for young children. And
Mm,
what a gift you had to give them. And then to be able to have spent the time with the Messiah and also be able to make these programs so that they are culturally appropriate for
mm,
them is just an amazing gift. So now you have people on the ground there in Africa doing this work, and then you come in and out and
mm.
do the administrative leadership.
Yes. So the program actually started this week, the next one, and I'm actually leaving in 2 weeks' time.
Oh,
Actually be at the tail end of it. So
wow.
the programs actually run for me, it's not about just one day. It's actually really embedding, what they're learning and then going in and building on it. So they run 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and then 6 months.
Yeah.
And then I also actually run financial literacy for women. So again, on that very first trip, I had actually done some work with Projects Abroad over there, and
Mm-hmm.
they were looking at setting up microfinance for women.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have anybody. And I went, well, actually, that's my thing. Finance is my background.
Yeah.
I'm a
Wow.
qualified counselor. Let me actually
Like
put
when
that
I
program
introduced you, I
together.
said multi-talented, right? What I
So
love about this story too is that that you've got this huge macro version, but look at each one of our lives. We've all gotten to the point in our life where we might say, I hate my life. No, I'm going nowhere, or whatnot. And then if you just twist the conversation a little bit in your head to say, okay, how can I serve with the gifts
yes,
that I am, that I do have, whether they're God-given gifts or acquired gifts, how can I serve? Then all of a sudden everything makes a big difference.
it is one of the
Yeah,
things that
it's
I
just
embed,
amazing.
particularly with everybody that I work with. So I'm
Mm,
really particular when it comes to choosing my clients. And that's the benefit that
mm,
I have,
yes.
being self-employed.
Mm,
I really stick to my values. So I will only work with people who actually are willing to or have got a philanthropical
mhm,
arm to what they do.
mm. Right, right.
Um, you know, from um, a commitment perspective, I actually have set up my business across different streams, which is what I also encourage people to do. Don't ever rely on one income stream,
Mhm.
and choose where you actually spend your time and make sure it always brings you joy.
Right.
Every
And
element
delegate the
of
other
it.
areas. Yes. Have
Yes.
you started teaching children leadership skills in the States now, well, US or Australia?
In
Have
Australia,
have you
yes.
been able to cross pollinate all that?
In Australia, yes. In the US, I've not yet.
Yes.
My focus is actually to look at spreading the work that I do in
Mhm.
other impoverished nations. I'd love to work in India and
Mhm.
in the Philippines.
Mm.
I worked in the Philippines for some time, so I'm quite attached to that. And India, I honestly believe that, if we can actually create a bigger impact, in
Mhm.
a community where there's so many children, then honestly, the world will be a really different place. So
Oh,
that's why I'm
yes, of
focusing on,
course.
those areas.
I mean, what a huge, huge mission, and what a huge service. What for any listeners who have young children, what can we teach our young children about leadership and thriving in the world? What are some of the maybe some of the tools or important wisdom you can impart?
One of the things that I recently actually just came across a social media post, and it was around confidence in speaking.
Mm.
And, I listened to what was being shared, and the message in that was type what you want to type, then practice it and practice it, record
Yes.
yourself, get practice it. And I thought, no, no, that's not teaching confidence. What we need to do is actually say to them what you have to say is of value. And
Mm.
it's
And speak
okay
from
to
your
share
heart.
your
Speak from your heart.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
What we're teaching them is almost that rote learning, and that's disingenuous.
Mm.
And we're also
I do believe like that skill of getting up in front of whether it's one-on-one or a group of people is a skill that I've always said should be taught at an early age, even if it's to talk about, the apple you just ate and how delicious that apple was. But that skill is going to do really well for you later on in life, no matter what job you have.
exactly.
Yeah.
Even as late as this morning, I was listening to my daughter and her partner actually speak, and she was trying to manage how she could work through a request for work, and she was saying, I can't juggle it, like it's just near impossible. they're asking me to do this and this. And he said, so why don't you just tell them that? And I sat there and I said to them, that is the one thing that is distinctive between a male and a female, particularly when it comes to work.
Communication. Yes.
Yeah, just
Yes.
tell them it
Yeah.
doesn't work, right? But instead we go, oh, let me try and work it out.
Although I am seeing a little bit, I mean, I grew up in the era of, get on the phone and call someone, speak to them face to face. And now we've got everything is electronic and you're sending texts. And the thing about sending texts and even emails for that matter is you don't get the emotion, you don't get the inflection, you don't get the eye to eye contact. And a lot of it is lost. And not only is a lot lost, but there are a lot of assumptions that can be made that are false because you're reading between the lines, but you may not be reading between the lines accurately. So I think a lot of young people could really benefit by really learning how to communicate in an honest, open, face-to-face way. And from what I could see, most young people that I've come in contact with avoid that like the plague.
Yes. Yes.
Like Ebola.
Well, it's interesting because they're actually raised with something in front of their face.
Yes, yes.
Like seriously, and I'm not, believe me, I'm so far not against technology, right?
Oh, it's great. It's great. Like, look at us. We're talking and you're in Australia and I'm in California. And
Yeah.
are you in Sydney?
Yes, I'm in Sydney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So love Sydney. I've been there once and loved it. Love the people. Yeah, I mean, look at what this is providing us today. However, there's another level, right?
Absolutely. And I think that that's something that we all have to be conscious of. It's actually using the tools, but not allowing them to actually use us. And
Yes.
that's a really big difference, which is why when I come back to confidence, teaching confidence and skills, it has to be embedded at a young age, at a stage where they look inward for the answers, not to
Yes.
continuously look outward, which is what we're actually showing them to do. We're not even teaching them, we're showing them because we're doing it ourselves.
Yeah. It's a lot of what I teach in my courses and in my books, which are all about personal and spiritual growth and development, is exactly that. All the answers are within. And if you could just take out the outside world, and just leave it aside, because that's not the truth. The truth is within you and who you are. Then things become a lot easier. It becomes a lot easier to make decisions from your heart, and also leading yourself and your passion and purpose in the world, rather than doing that from what others tell you what you should do or how you should act or how you should look. And young people, I feel really sometimes I feel sorry because they've grown up in this environment where all there is that external stimulation, right?
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. I have this wonderful intern from Boston at the moment working with me, and she's doing a management degree. And it's been interesting because she's majoring in marketing, and I said to her, oh my God, marketing is one of those areas where we need it. But gosh, I can't say I love it.
I know. I was a business admin major with a marketing minor, so I know.
Yeah, and I said to her, but part of, one of the things that I really want people to understand is the power of choice. You can choose what you do with your marketing. You can choose whether it actually drives you or whether you drive it. And you can be conscious about where you focus your time. But all of that is being lost, out there in the ethos on every single social media platform.
Yes. Yes. I'm glad let's pivot to the word conscious, because you talk a lot about in your bio conscious leadership. And I like to extend it to life too, conscious living, right? How do you live your life? Not only how you lead, but how you bring your value system into your life on an everyday basis. And that, of course, extends into your job if you're leading a group team of people or if you're running a company or whatnot. Talk a little bit to us about what conscious leadership is, both in your own personal life and extending that out to the workplace. And what does that mean to you? And what are some of the steps to be a more conscious leader?
So I often give the example of we experience so much every single day, whether it's in
Mm-hmm.
work or whether it's in life. But the difference with being conscious and also being intentional
Mm-hmm.
is different to what I think most of us actually understand it to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I give an example of we can actually, walk past and actually hear a discussion or see something that doesn't align, with our values, or we know that it's actually not the right thing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But what we tend to do is we actually might talk to the person that's with us, or we'll share the experience with somebody else. But in that moment, we haven't really done anything. We have
Mm-hmm.
allowed that to play out.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if we are intentionally conscious about the choices that we make,
Mm-hmm.
it is actually making sure that we align our values in that moment and we take action.
Mm-hmm. And that action comes from a place of compassion, from empathy, from equality, from respect, not from uh, confrontation, negativity. Correct?
Absolutely. You can actually see an argument, and we certainly wouldn't know what had actually happened or transpired prior to that. But when you can actually see that somebody is fearful,
Mm,
we can actually just step in and say, I can see that you're actually both upset. Is there
mm,
something that maybe that I can do, or can we actually, take you to sit down, or, you know, is there just take a breath. There is
mm,
something that we can do. I give an example of, one last year I was actually speaking at one of the International Women's Day events. And as the young student who was introducing me at that particular event, we were having this private conversation, and she shared some of her fears about finishing school and the expectations around her. But as she leaned out to get the microphone so that she could introduce me, I noticed cuttings on her arm.
mm,
And in that moment, this is where the consciousness comes into play. In that moment, I realized she shared something incredibly vulnerable with me. And here I am talking about,
mm,
intergenerational discussions. My topic was, because it was with school students, grandparents, people in the community.
mhm,
And I thought, it doesn't matter what I was going to say, I need to be here and now.
mhm,
So I changed my entire presentation and actually talked to topics that would actually allow her to see things a little bit differently. And it was, for me, that's what being conscious is about. It's
mhm.
by recognizing who you're in the presence of, what you're not hearing just as much as what you are hearing, and what they need from you then and there.
Right. And what you're being shown, right, in that present moment. I mean, she didn't physically put her arm out to you, but you were being shown that
Yes.
and you
Yeah.
reacted accordingly. And I think that extends to how we react to anyone we come in contact with, since we are spiritually and universally connected, as
Mm.
I believe. And whether that's, in the supermarket where you've got someone, I always feel like when you encounter people that are angry or having a good day, I sort of like try to send them a bubble of love, or try
Yes.
to say extra nice things instead of
Yeah.
going the opposite, which is our normal tendency, right? Is to go the opposite and say, hey, they're not going to get the best of me. I'm going to just give it right back to them. But if you do the opposite, you find that all of a sudden you can actually create a positive change in people in
Yeah.
an instant. In an instant. if you
Yes.
if you don't react the way they're maybe even expecting you to react, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're
Yeah.
breaking a cycle, not just for you, but for them too.
Mm-hmm.
Their expectations are what their lived experiences have been. And maybe you're that one person that breaks that cycle that actually enables them to take a different path.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just a smile.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just greeting someone. I remember over the holidays last year, I was at a food store and I could tell that the checkout counter person was really aggravated, really, really aggravated. And she was kind of snippy with the people in front, and she was a little snippy with me too. And I said, you know what? And I was, I had been waiting online along, it's the holidays, everybody's stressed. And I said to myself, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go down that route. I don't know what her story is. I don't know if she has a comfortable living environment at home or a safe living environment. I don't know what her boss told her this morning. I don't know what her financial situation is or what the customer in front of me might have said or done. So I'm just going to take another route and just be nice and just compliment her. And I said something about, oh, that's a great color on your hair. Some I don't know what I said, something like that. And all of a sudden her whole demeanor changed just
Yeah.
like that. And that's
Yep.
the power of having compassion and, as you call it, consciousness, being conscious of what is going on around you and reacting in a loving way instead of a confrontational way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't take much, and I
No,
think that's the
called
message.
kindness. It's called
Yeah.
kindness.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, uh, we have all experienced that where we might be in a glut, but somebody
Yeah.
walks in the door with this big smile. You can't
Yes.
help but smile, right?
Yes, yes. Well, there's that whole therapy, laughing therapy, right? Where people just laugh, 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 even if they don't
Yes.
feel like it. And then all of a sudden they're like, wow, I feel a lot better now.
Yes.
Laughing does that. Laughing and smiling does that. You
Yeah.
you talk about getting people out, making the leap out of their comfort zone, so to speak. And I think that's really, really important work, no matter what you're dealing with, whether you're dealing with personal challenges or work challenges. And we tend to, from my experience, people tend to stay in a comfort zone, even though it's not happy. It's not their happy zone, but it's their comfort
Yes.
zone because they're so afraid to break out of that. What are some of the tips or advice you can give people that are in a situation where it's comfortable, but they don't really want to be there, whether that's in a marriage, whether it's in a job, whether it's trying to launch something new in their life, whether it's making a big decision, I don't know, having a baby or moving to a new state or country. How do people get out of their comfort zone?
Well, I think it's actually firstly understanding that that's where
Hmm.
they're sitting. That's almost
Yes,
a blind spot
recognizing,
to
yes.
start off with, right?
Yeah.
So I ask a couple of really simple questions, and one is what else is possible. So instantly, I choose not to use the word "what if" because if brings doubt,
Mm,
but else actually opens up the
mm,
mind. And so
I like that.
instantly they're changing their pattern, in the way that they look at something. So asking what else is possible automatically shifts their brain into, oh, well, I can do other things. And so they instantly come up with their own solutions. The other thing that I ask is, what does that actually mean for you? So, no matter what it is that they're sharing, they then have to honestly look within and try and explain what it is that they're combating or where they're stuck or, what they think that
Mm,
they're actually doing. It's interesting how we develop a pattern of just saying and believing and doing things,
mm.
but not necessarily thinking about it. And so, by asking those two really simple questions, you instantly break the pattern of where they've been to where they can be.
So
And
what
they're
are
the
the two
ones that have,
questions? Just once more.
what else? What else is possible?
What else is possible? And second,
And the second question is, and what does that mean for you?
okay.
So it actually breaks that
Mm,
perception of under them thinking that I understand, but it also makes them qualify
yes.
what it is that they think, that they're either doing or that they're seeing or that they're living. You know, it genuinely shifts the way that they look at where they are in that moment.
Hmm.
So that's breaking those barriers that have never been, touched before.
Hmm. What
So
about, this show is mainly followed by women, and I only interview women. Do you find women respond to those questions differently, or are there more things holding women back from going out of their comfort zone and realizing following a dream or doing or making big decisions?
you know, it's interesting that you say that. So a male will actually just talk and try and navigate out of it. Um, Whereas a female will genuinely listen to what's just been asked of them and then almost break down into tears, because it
Mhm.
is that moment of realization of, I actually don't know. I don't
And
know
they're
what.
okay with saying they don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a
Um,
biggie.
it is the biggest barrier, in
Yeah.
actually taking that next step forward. Or it is that moment of sheer elation where they go, oh my God, I can actually do this, and I do this, and it's almost this incredible, energy that just bursts through. But I will say what happens is that they get that enlightenment, and then there is the, oh my gosh, and can I do it? So that, that's another level.
Yes.
But we're breaking those actual original barriers that, almost were like vaults.
Right, and until you know what's possible, there's nothing to follow, right? And you kind of get
Exactly.
stagnated. You're just stuck in one spot. Once you know what's possible, then you can go for it. Well,
Yeah.
you have had such a wonderful, epiphany in your own life. And how do you take care of yourself on a regular basis, your own consciousness and your own spirituality? And sounds like you're going from continent to continent, helping others. What do you do for yourself on a daily basis?
So I welcome in the sun every day.
Mm,
That is, I guess that is my place to be centered again. So of an evening, I actually reflect on what I've been able to do, to serve, to pay forward, what I would like to do differently.
hmm.
And then in the morning, it is welcome in the sun or the cloud or whatever it might be for that particular
It's
morning.
okay. It's another day. Things just keep
Yes,
going on.
exactly, right? But honestly, it's the simple things. We don't have to make anything complicated.
Yes.
And people say, well, why do you get up to see the sun every day? It's the sun that's rising. And I look at them and I say, I have never, ever, ever seen the same sunrise, ever.
Right.
That actually shows me what's possible in the world, something
And it
different
puts you in a
every
state
day.
of awe, right? Which is a wonderful way to live life on a daily basis, is to kind of live it through like a child would, like everything is just
New.
fresh and new. And it is. I mean, our cells regenerate constantly, so we
Yes.
forget that.
Yes. No, absolutely. You're right. I think we've looked at the world and realized how much advancement, there has been over the last, I don't know, century, the
Yes.
last 10 years even, right? And somehow seem to always think that everything has to be complicated. But that's actually a trap that we put ourselves into.
Yes.
Nothing has
Especially in
to
the
be.
materialistic world.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. I don't need to have the latest, technology of everything that comes out. if it works, it works.
I know after a certain point, I think in life, you're like, okay, no, I don't need that latest version. I'm okay with what I got.
Yes, exactly.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh. Well, Cathy, thank you so much for your presence here today and all of your insight, and love, love, love the work that you're doing both here and in Africa. But well, here I'm meaning Australia. Listeners, you can find links to connect with Cathy, her websites, etc., on my website, selfpowernow.com. And while you're there, you can also find links for free gifts, and you can listen to other podcasts and all kinds of things, courses and whatnot. I wish everybody a great day. Cathy, thanks again so much for being here. Love to have your
Pleasure.
company. And I hope the listeners come back again. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Self Power Now. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with others, follow it on your favorite podcast platform, and join our community on selfpowernow.com and receive 3 free happiness gifts. And while you're there, if you're looking for more ways to be happy, healthy, peaceful, and loved, check out my books and new online courses. Until next time, this is Debbie Jasoni wishing you self-power now.